The Sparrow Racing League, or SRL as it's commonly called by the community, has finally made its debut in Destiny 2, nearly 11 years after it was introduced in Destiny 1. Today we are going to go over how SRL works, god roll recommendations for PvE, and then a few tips and tricks to give you the best chance at getting first place. If you just want the tips, then skip to the time on the screen or in the description, otherwise let's get into it. When you load into an SRL match, you'll be met with a short cutscene and then you'll be at the start of the track with a 3-second countdown. A quick tip, which we'll go over in more detail later, but when the countdown reaches 2 seconds, press and hold the Sparrow boost button. This will give you a mega boost when the race starts, and that can be the difference between winning and losing. Now, the race is comprised of 3 laps, and there are boost gates positioned throughout the track. They're smaller when you're in first place, larger when you're in last, and if you miss them, you lose speed. If you hit them, you obviously get a boost. Another way to get a boost is when you're midair, you can perform a trick which when you land will give you a boost, and that really does make a difference between winning and losing. Dodging is also a key part of SRL and is commonly used to hit boost gates if you're slightly out of place, and is especially beneficial in first place when the gates are very small. Before you go into SRL, I would advise you just to double check what your Sparrow keybinds and buttons are, as you need to use them if you want a chance at winning. Now, regarding the loot, which is a selection of weapons, your placement in the race does partially determine the tier of the weapon that you receive. That doesn't mean you'll never receive a tier 5 if you place last, just that you need to place as high as possible to get them as often as possible. So you now know how SRL works, but that doesn't mean you're always going to win. So here are 5 tips to give you the best chance at winning in SRL. As we discussed when explaining how SRL works, the easiest thing you can do, and our first tip, is to press and hold the boost button when the race countdown reaches 2 seconds. Doing this will give you a mega boost when the race begins. Not many people know about this, so it really can give you a huge head start. Now, tip number 2 is to go over as many ramps as possible. Remember that you can perform tricks mid-air which will give you a boost when you land. So you want to be in the air as much as possible, which means going over as many ramps as you can. Basically, anytime you're in the air, do a trick. Following on, and we have tip number 3. Change your trick keybinds or buttons to make it easier to perform the tricks. I'm not sure if it's an issue on controller, but on PC, the arrow keys are the trick keys, which are super far away from the main keys that you'll be using. So you want to change the keybinds and buttons to what works best for you. I'm on PC and I've set my number 4 key to be a trick so that I can use it much easier. Before I changed it, I had to move my entire left hand to do a trick, which obviously isn't ideal. Tip number 4 is a little more technical in a way, but I'll do my best to explain. Basically, when going around a corner, you want to stay as tight as possible to the inside corner or bend. For example, if the corner goes to the right, then stay as right as possible. We want to do this because it means we have less of the track to travel on to get around the corner. I have many times been behind other players, but I have been able to overtake them when going around corners because I stayed tight to the corner. It's something really simple, but it does make a huge difference. Our final tip sort of follows on from tip number 4. When going around a corner, use your dodge in the direction of the corner. Doing this will allow us to get around the corner much quicker. We won't go too in-depth on the science, but your Sparrow is a heavy object, so it is not going to turn instantly. However, when we dodge on a Sparrow, our Sparrow moves in the direction of the dodge, which nullifies the sort of drag effect when you're turning, so we get around the corner much quicker. With those 5 tips, you should have a much higher chance at getting first place for all those tier 5 weapons. And speaking of weapons, let's go over some perk recommendations before we finish the video. Before we continue though, these are just my personal suggestions. It's absolutely okay to disagree, and I would love to hear your perk recommendations down in the comments. So here are the perks for each SRL weapon that I would recommend. Terciopelo 4BL is a solar sword, and for your main perks, definitely go for Eager Edge and Chaos Reshaped. For additional perks on tier 5 weapons, go for Relentless Strikes and Sharp Harvest. A very good perk pool all around. Now, the Vikala SMG4 is a Void Heat SMG, and for your main perks, I would recommend Dimensional Shift and Chaos Reshaped. Dimensional Shift doesn't generate your own Void breaches, but through Void subclasses and the artifacts, there are plenty of ways to do so. For the additional perks, I would try and get Cooling Bubbles and then Destabilizing Rounds. We've then got the Volantif D, which is a solar micro-missile pulse rifle, and for your main perks, I would recommend Air Trigger and Incandescent, with Heal Clip and Sword Logic as additional perks. Micro-missile pulse rifles aren't for boss damage anymore, but they still deal pretty good damage to non-boss enemies. For Crux Cerulatus IV, a strand rocket launcher, I would go for Slideways and Reaper's Tithe, with additional perks being Reconstruction and Bipod. This weapon doesn't have any good reload perks for damage rotation, so we're going towards using it for general play. Next up is the Snipe Hunt MK47, which is an arc auto rifle, and for your main perks, I would go Jolting Feedback and Chaos Reshaped, with Supercharged Magazine and Bolt Shot as your additional perks. Finally, we have the Accelerando 42, and I'm just going to say it. I'm not a fan of the perk selection, or the fact that it's a precision fusion rifle. But for the main perks, I would go Cornered and Surrounded, with the additional perks being Overflow and Reservoir or Controlled Burst. Again, these are just my suggestions of what makes the most sense for the weapons. With that, we have now reached the end of the video. Hopefully you now know exactly how SRL works, some tips to get ahead and get those tier 5s, and what perks are good to have on those weapons. If this video helped you at all, a subscribe would be so greatly appreciated. We recently hit 560 subscribers, and that's just crazy to me, so thank you. As always though, thank you for watching, have a great day.